right now. All right, so welcome to another episode of Popular Education, everybody. We've been planning this episode for a bit. We kind of messed it up last time, had a great old time laughing about it by the time we stopped taking it serious, and we learned some good lessons about what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, without further ado, oh, yay, it's working, Logan says. Cool. So, without further ado, here's a little apology to listeners to get started. 2 weeks ago, we tried doing an iteration of this and failed pretty hard. For us, it ended up being a funny and practical experience, namely, make sure your microphone is added to StreamYard. But we listened to the critiques and we learned some things. So, as an apology for our failure to meet expectations, we decided to exceed them this time. To that end, welcome to our two-part special on Anarcho-Syndicalism. We hope everyone has fun listening and learns a lot. And this was an important topic for us because both the CGT and the CNT are still around, and we're actually beginning to see what we're trying to do with this class. So, Jordan, you want to take it?
Sure. A few important definitions. What is a union? A union, or syndicate in French, is an organization formed by workers who join together to protect their shared interests at work. Its basic purpose is to give workers collective power to negotiate their wages, hours, working conditions, defend themselves against unfair treatment, and act together when individual workers would be unable to act on their own. The means of production. The means of production are the tools, machines, land, buildings, and resources used to produce goods and services. Whoever controls the means of production effectively controls how work is organized, what is produced, and who benefits from that work. Anytime socialism is being discussed, it's important to understand that socialism has two types: libertarian, without a state, and authoritarian, with a state. Socialism itself concerns economy, economics, and property, specifically who owns and controls productive resources and how they are distributed. Under capitalism, the means of production are owned by a small class of capitalists who profit from the labors of others, and supposedly themselves. Under socialism, oh, that's a comma. I thought that was a period. Whoops. Under socialism, the means of production are collectively owned and controlled by the workers who use them, so that production is organized to meet human needs rather than generate profit. Mm.
Would you like to
Do you want me to
clarify,
read?
fish sticks? Alrighty.
What is syndicalism? Syndicalism emerged in the late 19th century and early 20th centuries out of militant labor movements, especially in France, as a response to both employer power and the limits of parliamentary socialism. It argues that unions organized by industry can use direct action, especially strikes, to win immediate concessions from employers and eventually gain control of the means of production. What makes anarcho syndicalism different? Anarcho syndicalism is a political idea which states that workers should organize themselves at work to fight exploitation and, through those same organizations, replace capitalism and the state. Instead of governments, bosses, and other unsavory authority figures, society would be run directly by workers, using federations of the workplace, called unions, that make decisions collectively and coordinate production to meet human needs, and sin, for short. is different from syndicalism by rejecting the state entirely and being explicitly revolutionary. Syndicalism can be revolutionary, but it can also be reformist. It can be capitalist or socialist. Anarcho-syndicalism, in contrast, is explicitly revolutionary, anti-state, and anti-capitalist. Boycott. A boycott is an action in which workers or communities collectively refuse to buy, use, sell, or handle goods or services in order to pressure an employer, company, or institution to change its behavior. A boycott applies economic pressure directly by disrupting profit, distribution, or other normal operations. Boycotts are most effective when organized collectively and tied to strikes or pickets. Wildcat strikes. A strike that begins suddenly, driven by workers on the job in response to immediate problems at work. Workers act together to stop unsafe working conditions, wage theft, speed ups, or abuse by management. They're often short, disruptive, and tightly connected to workplace struggles. They've been widely used by militant workers, especially in the industrial workers of the world. Sabotage. Sabotage is when workers deliberately reduce, disrupt, or withhold labor in order to resist exploitation. Sabotage in relation to unions has nothing to do with boomies. Rather, workers committing sabotage do so by controlling how their work is done, refusing speed ups, damages machines in ways that could easily be fixed by workers, following rules to the letter, wasting the boss's time, or otherwise damaging profit generation. And for clarification, Dom, what does boomies mean? I'm not familiar with that term.
Explosives.
Okay. Do you want me to do this one too?
I think I can try.
Okay.
Emile Pouget. He was born in. Oh, he was a journalist, writer, and anarchist born October 12th, 1860, in Pont de Solar, France. He died on July 21st, 1931, at the age of 70. Pouget was a central figure in the rise of revolutionary syndicalism, and he came from a working class background and became active in radical politics in the 1880s when many workers around the world faced long hours, low pay, and unsafe conditions during the height of the Industrial Revolution. Pouget became known for editing La Paire, uh, yeah, a newspaper written in everyday language that criticized systems of power and encouraged workers to stand up for themselves. He was deeply involved in revolutionary unions, and he believed workers should not depend on politicians or political parties to fix their problems. Instead, he argued that workers already have power because they do the work that keeps society running. Pouget helped connect anarchism with strong organized unions, and he believed that unions should fight for better conditions now while also preparing workers to eventually run society themselves. For him, unions were schools for cooperation, solidarity, and self management, and as such, essential to anarchism. You may actually have to take this over. My voice ain't working.
No problem. Fernand, oh gosh, Pelletier. Why not? Could be Pelletier? Who knows? Not me. Born October 1st, 1867, in Paris, France. Died March 13th, 1901, at the age of 33, in Sèvres, France. French anarchist, theorist, and labor organizer. Fernand Pelletier was focused on education and worker self organization. Although he died young, his ideas had strong influence on the early labor movement in France. Pelletier believed workers needed more than strikes. They needed knowledge, confidence, and shared spaces where they could learn and organize together. In some cases, Pelletier's theories could be almost a generation ahead of his time. Pelletier is best known for his work, History de Bourse de Travail, History of the Labor Exchange, published in 1902, and also for his time in the labor exchanges. These were worker run centers that offered job listings, meeting rooms, libraries, and classes. He saw them as places where workers could support one another outside the control of the state and employers. Pelletier helped shape the foundation of anarcho syndicalist theory and argued that workers could not be freed by laws or governments, but only by organizing their own economic life. His emphasis on education, mutual aid, and local worker control became a key foundation of ANSYN theory. Rudolf Rocker, incredible last name. Born March 25th, 1873, in Mainz, Germany. Died September 19th, 1958, in Mohegan, New York. German anarchist, theorist and writer, organizer. Rudolf Rocker is one of the most important anarchists of the early 20th century. He maintained close relationships with anarchists across Europe, Britain, the Americas, and beyond. He helped ideas, writings, and support movements across borders, and Rocker is one of our strongest critics of nationalism. He argued that it divided workers and justified his international outlook, helped shape anarchism as a global movement based on love and solidarity.
I think we forgot to edit that one.
Yeah, that's a bit of a rough paragraph. Rocker was vital to the development of the anarchist Black Cross and believed that supporting imprisoned anarchists and political prisoners was a responsibility of any anarchist movement. By helping to organize aid, raise awareness, and coordinate international support, Rocker helped make the ABC an international organization with chapters all over the West. Rocker's contributions to anarcho syndicalism are equally as vital. He lays down the definitive description of anarchist unions in Anarcho Syndicalism Theory and Practice. This will be the most important work for our topic today. Theory. Before we move on to the actual theory section, I'll pause just in case anyone has any clarifying questions about the figures or definitions before we get into the actual meat of the lesson. Anyone? All right. Prioritization of the economic struggle. The idea that workers gain real power and freedom primarily by organizing and fighting together at work. That the labor struggle for fair wages, fair hours, better working conditions, and control over how work is done is vital to the overall anarchist cause. By acting collectively in workplaces and industries, the workers build solidarity, protect themselves from exploitation, and develop the ability to manage production directly. According to this view, lasting change grows out of everyday economic resistance and cooperation among workers. In 1896, the Fédération des Boursiers de Travail, under the leadership of Fernand Pelloutier, issued a nationwide call for a May 1st general strike, focused on economic demands. Workers were told they should withdraw their labor across trades and localities to press for better wages, shorter hours, and greater control over the conditions of work. The strike was organized through labor exchanges, local labor councils that coordinated job placement, strike funds, mutual aid, joint negotiation strategies, and worker education. The labor exchanges unified the workers' resistance across industries and towns by horizontally linking unions and doing the everyday work of sustaining strikes. The strike helped to deepen confidence in direct action and economic self activity, reinforcing the Ansin claim that the economic struggle must come first. Union framework. In practice of anarcho-syndicalism, trade unions are the basic structure of a new, future socialist society. Unions organize workers by industry and workplace in a way that can directly take over production, distribution, and social coordination once capitalism is abolished. Workers would manage their economic and social life through their unions and for anarcho-syndicalisms. This means that unions are both instruments of struggle today and the living foundation of a free, worker-run society tomorrow. After the military coup in July of 1936, state authority collapsed across much of Catalonia, Spain. Instead of waiting for a new government, the National Confederation of Labor, CNT, reorganized social life through its existing union structure. CNT workplace unions took over factories, transportation, utilities, and services, while rural syndicates collectivized land and production. Each workplace was run by assemblies of workers on equal ground, which elected committees responsible for coordination and technical tasks. Industries were linked through industrial federations, and local federations coordinated food distribution, transport, healthcare, and housing. Decisions flowed from the assemblies up through the federations, not, not the federation down to the worker. The CNT remains the clearest example of a union becoming the foundation of a new society that I've found to the current era. Direct action. The principle that workers advance their interests and change society by acting for themselves. Workers must use collective action to apply pressure or meet their needs themselves. Strikes, boycotts, slowdowns, sabotage, workplace occupations, and the mass refusal were all common tools of revolutionary unions like the CNT in Spain, the CGT in France, and the IWW in the Americas. When people who are directly affected take collective action to solve a problem or force change without permission, they are engaging in direct action. In Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1912, owners of textile mills cut wages after a state mandated reduction in hours. Over 20,000 immigrant workers across dozens of shops walked out without waiting for union recognition, politicians, or legal remedies. The strike was organized through mass assemblies and elected strike committees, planned flying pickets, and collectively refused to work. Or I guess that would be better phrased as collective work refusals. Workers coordinated food distribution, strike relief, translation, and disciplined themselves. The industrial workers of the world rejected negotiations and escalated pressure on the local economy until employers conceded wage increases and improved their working conditions. Class consciousness is achieved by struggle. Rocker specifically argues that workers come to understand their shared interests and collective power by acting together in everyday conflicts over work and living conditions. These struggles are not necessarily violent. Anarcho-syndicalism rejects the idea that a political party or vanguard can create class consciousness on behalf of workers. Anarcho-syndicalism criticizes armchair theorizing and revolutionary dogma that are separated from the lived struggle and collective action. Awareness, and anarcho-syndicalism's claim, grows through experience and reflection. For the industrial workers of the world, Local Number 8 in Philadelphia, they would come to embody this theory. Local Number 8 was a workforce made up largely of black workers, European immigrants, and Caribbean sailors, as well as all kinds of colonized workers from the global south. Prior to organizing, the dock work was rigidly divided by race and nationality. a system deliberately used by employers to prevent solidarity. Through collective strikes, slowdowns, and mass job actions organized on the job, workers learned that racial division weakened everyone. The IWW refused segregated locals and insisted on equal pay for equal work. As workers fought together against shipping companies, class identity replaced racial hierarchy, and it emerged through shared risk, repression, and mutual dependence. Anti parliamentarianism. This is the idea that workers can't free themselves through elections or parliamentary politics, which is more widely recognized as electoralism. From the anarcho syndicalist perspective, taking part in parliament shifts power away from workers acting together and places it in the hands of representatives, parties, and institutions built to keep capitalism running. Instead of using their own collective strength, workers are turned into voters who wait for decisions made by others. When unions and labor movements focus on elections and laws, they are pushed to seek stability and compromise, which means limiting strikes and softening demands. Throughout 1936 and 1937, CNT leaders such as Federica Montseny, Juan Garcia Olivier, and Diego Abad de Santillan accepted ministerial roles within the Republican government. Through them, the CNT was pressed to prioritize stability, legality, and discipline over direct worker control. Militias began to centralize, strikes began to be restrained, and collectivizations suddenly subordinated back to the state. Participation in electoral and government structures had broken the spine of the National Confederation of Labor. Revolutionary capacity diminished, and during the May Days of 1937, this culminated in the rollback of worker power. Dual power. Workers can build and exercise their own collective power, while capitalism and the state still exist. Instead of waiting to take power later, workers create independent organizations that directly organize life in the present. These worker run structures exist alongside and in opposition to capitalist and statist institutions, gradually weakening them by making them less necessary. Struggle and construction happen at the same time. Workers resist exploitation while also practicing self management. The term is widely credited to Vladimir Lenin in 1917. However, it was actually Fernand Pelloutier who describes it first in History of Labor Exchanges, nearly a full generation before Lenin popularized his state centered version of the theory. The labor exchanges of France exercised a form of dual power before the concept even had a name. While the capitalist state and employers formally governed society, workers simultaneously built their own independent institutions that performed essential social functions. The exchanges provided an education, libraries, technical writing, job services, mutual aid for sickness and unemployment, and collected economic data for worker use. Pelloutier explicitly notes that the Boursiers saw themselves as bodies aspiring to form the structure of a future social order based on the sovereignty of labor. Power was therefore split. Capital and the state officially ruled, but workers increasingly governed their own economic and social life through federated labor institutions. Prefiguration. Instead of using hierarchical, authoritarian, or top down methods now, while promising freedom later, anarcho syndicalism holds that the means used in struggle shape the outcomes. The ends must reflect the means. If workers want a free, cooperative, and self managed society, they must practice cooperation, democracy, and self management in their organizations today. The idea comes from Fernand Pelloutier, who described workers and the labor exchanges practicing prefiguration. In November 1936, as Franco's forces advanced on Madrid, the Durruti column rushed from the Aragon front to reinforce the city, fighting primarily in the University City district. In the urban fighting, comrades took initiative without waiting for orders. Coordination grew naturally between groups fighting together, and the Durruti column was able to respond faster as a whole to changing conditions of the battle. Durruti himself was mortally wounded during this defense, but the column helped halt the fascist advance. Democratic, self managed organization had proved superior to Franco's fascist forces. The Durruti column had been consciously organized to reflect an alternative hierarchy from its formation in July 1936, with elected delegates, equal pay, shared living conditions, and shockingly, no commanders. Decisions pertaining to the column were made collectively by the column.
Wanted to put out a clarification. An alternative to hierarchy. Sorry.
Yeah. That makes more sense, yeah. Syndicate federalism. Society should be coordinated through networks of self managed unions and communities that operate through free agreement and free association instead of central planning by a central authority or quote unquote free markets, seeking profit at the expense of people. Decisions are made locally by those affected and coordinated across industries and regions through federations. Each level of coordination exists to carry out shared tasks and connect one syndicate or region to another, not to rule over anything. Federalism itself is a theory of Mikhail Bakunin. However, anarchist syndicates and Rudolf Rocker utterly systematize it in anarcho-syndicalism. Federalism inseparable from the operation of anarcho-syndicalism, whereas certain forms of individualist anarchism operate without or opposed to federalism. In 1906 and 1907, miners in Goldfield, Nevada, organized across multiple unions to confront mine owners over wages, safety, and control of their work. The IWW worked alongside the Western Federation of Miners to coordinate strikes, plan pickets, and enforce the working conditions they demanded through joint committees with recallable elected delegates. Neither union coded their structure, membership, or decision-making process. Seeded their structure, membership, or decision-making process while fighting the bosses in Goldfield. The cooperation between the two unions allowed workers to effectively shut down the mills and assert control over them. Autonomous worker organizations linked through free agreement exercised their collective power. Syndicalist anti-authoritarianism. Socialism is impossible under any form of centralized dictatorial rule, even if it claims to represent workers. Socialism depends on workers directly managing their own work and society. Dictatorship does the opposite by concentrating decision making in the hands of a few and turning the majority into followers. According to Rudolf Rocker, once power is separated from the workers themselves, a new ruling group forms and controls production in their place. This is a structural issue in Rocker's mind, and because of this, anarcho syndicalism rejects any form of temporary or emergency centralization, arguing that methods based on command and obedience cannot lead to a free society.
Does anybody recognize what's going on in this picture here? Nobody? All right.
Nope.
Well, after the October Revolution of 1917, the sailors of Kronstadt became one of the most radical centers of worker self-management in Russia. For a brief period, the Baltic Fleet operated through elected ship committees, sailor assemblies, and recallable delegates with strong anarchist influence. Kronstadt sailors helped defend Petrograd and helped demonstrate that a horizontally run navy could function effectively. However, beginning in 1918, the Bolshevik leadership under Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky dismantled worker controlled factories through the militarization of labor, which abolished independent factory committees and subordinated unions to the state. By March 1921, Kronstadt sailors demanded free Soviet Council elections, union independence, and the restoration of worker control. They demanded a return to the socialism that they had built, and the Bolsheviks responded by crushing their rebellion because it threatened the centralized authority of the Bolsheviks had built.
Forum.
I had to shoehorn Kronstadt somewhere in there.
Oh my god. I had not seen a picture of the Kronstadt sailors, but I've heard all about them.
So, word of the forum, guys, we made it.
Ooh, I will be right back. Please carry on without me.
Alrighty. So, if capitalists disappeared tomorrow, what would change?
The workers have to manage their own workplaces. Kind of no option otherwise.
Well, I know I'd be making a lot more money.
Yeah. Capital owners would, once disappeared, ownership would have to reliably fall to the people that know how to use the machinery, how to complete the tasks, to create the output, uh, the services that are necessary for it to keep on functioning. So the without the without with the workers, without the capital owners would be the uh, automatic owners of the systems of work that would exist.
Hmm.
So, in other words, pretty much everything would change, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine how it would look anything like the way things do now. I would say though that this kind of is it is unrealistic, but this is largely addressed in the part where you were talking about prefiguration. Like that's the
Yeah.
importance of prefiguration, of
Yeah.
people being able to seize when the time comes, because sadly they're not going to be wiped out in just one go.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, it's kind of the undermining of this really toxic fantasy that like there will be quote unquote a revolution that's like a singular event that happens and then everything is all, like an illustration of like rainbows and trees and animals in a forest running around, people in tunics and stuff like that. Like you have to do the slow, quiet work of building structures and organizations so that there will be something there if and when, and hopefully when, the power structure that you're trying to replace falls apart.
Conversely, if laborers disappeared tomorrow, what would change?
Oh my god, everything. The
Yeah,
whole world would
no
instantly
services
fall
will be
apart.
rendered.
Nothing. Trash wouldn't get picked up, groceries wouldn't get delivered, food wouldn't be restocked in stores, things like medicine and pills wouldn't be delivered, nothing would be delivered. People living in houses and gated communities way out in the middle of nowhere and like way out in Broken Arrow would like starve because things would break and they wouldn't be able to get access to their food or deliveries. Schools would stop functioning. Society would instantly fall apart within a day.
See, I love how we were struggling for an answer of capitalists disappeared, but we were just like, no, everything is screwed if laborers disappear.
Well, that's kind of the whole point. I think it's the basis for our whole world is the people that produce things, the people who are affected by things are the people. Sorry, are the people that should have the know-how. This is why training is important.
Yeah.
So of course, like if to like to say like a nuclear bomb or something takes out the a bunch of people, then it is good to have people that are experts that can take their place. But like in this world, that would not happen. Like people are not trained up. The people with expertise, if they're gone, everything is just screeching to a halt.
Well, it's pretty frustrating. Like, one of my favorite metaphors for thinking about any kind of power relationship is to think about like an abusive family situation. And something that I think a lot of people have experienced in some sort of abusive situation, not anything particularly triggering, hopefully, is that someone will tell you that you don't matter, that your work doesn't matter, that your position doesn't matter, that you don't matter. And something that people will eventually do when trying to fight back against that abusive partner, family member, is to say, okay, well, then I'll stop doing it. I'm going to leave. I'll stop cooking or cleaning or doing all of the things that you do. And then suddenly the tune changes and they'll start talking about how important and essential you are and how much they need you and need to have you back. They can't exist without that dichotomy to simultaneously abuse you but also make you feel as though you are completely like unsacrificable, I guess, when push comes to shove.
If people learn freedom by practicing it, what kind of organizations help people learn that? And what kinds make it almost impossible?
Well, I would say, of course, systems that are upheld through freedom, right? In which that there's no what's it called, like monopolization of the power within the structure. Rather, it is given to people from the bottom so that they can all implement a society fit towards their needs. And the kinds that make that impossible are the ones that are hierarchically organized, um, so that people, like in the first example, if all capitalists go away, people may not immediately be able to just seize the circumstances that they've been given because they've not developed the capacity to actually have free lives.
If I could jump in, I something that I think is small but really important is like when you're in an organization, oftentimes, and especially when you're new to it, there will be this divorce between the stuff that we do and the way that we interact with one another. And so it will feel to someone that, like, oh, sure, we fight and there's a lot of drama, but we're still getting stuff done. But I've found that the most effective organizations also have really good mediation techniques, something to do when people actually have problems that acts as sort of that, I forget the name of it, I think prefiguration of like being able to plan ahead and embody the values you're trying to see in the world within your own relationships and your own dynamics with people. That's a pretty good red flag for an org if they don't do that.
Anybody else?
Has anyone said anything in the stream?
Not yet.
Mm-hmm.
If workers are capable of running society, why does hierarchy keep coming back, even in movements that oppose it?
I mean, I think that it's because that's the thing that people, there's this thing I learned in therapy that like it can be hard to correct a habit if it's been something you've done for a long time because in your brain, pathways that your neurons have traveled down the most are the easiest to travel down because they're the path of least resistance. So the stuff that you do the most and that you know the most and see the most in other people is going to be what you automatically default towards. In other words, hierarchy has been the norm for so long that I think it's the only system people know when push comes to shove. But I could be proven wrong. I'm not totally firm on that.
Janarchy says hierarchy wants to keep a monopoly on economic power.
Yeah, I'd largely agree with both of those statements. It kind of goes back to the earlier dynamics we were talking about of, like, it largely does come back to prefiguration a lot, because the way that we uphold systems are made through our actions, and these kind of go back on us and create ideas about how society ought to be run or how it has been running. That's how it should be. And this makes it so if people are continuing to operate under these specific structures, that they will inevitably lead to those ends, even if it is negative towards the people within them.
How would our idea of politics change if we treated the workplace as more important than elections or government? Real quick, Brendan said, hang on, let me pull my chat up. I think the idea of hierarchy is appealing in a vague way to people conditioned to feeling disempowered, even if they like or dislike a specific hierarchy.
Yeah. That kind of reflects something from Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that even someone who is being oppressed will have been trained to emulate or empathize more with the oppressor than themselves. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine what it would feel like if workplaces were considered the most important, um, rather than elections or government, because we see the framing device of government as an organization as something that is so essential that it's 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 hard to imagine what that would look like on a macro scale. I can kind of imagine scaling up a micro thing like an effective union or one of the examples you provided, Dom, but I'm not sure.
Well, oh, that's okay.
Go ahead.
No, that's all right.
If anarcho-syndicalist unions make
Want me
decisions
this one?
directly and
If anarcho-syndicalist unions make decisions directly and collectively, how is that different from majority rule democracy?
Lambda,
Or
do you?
does collectively mean? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, you have a question? Okay. Uh, Lambda, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah. By these are individuals that are making direct decisions upon the workplace where they themselves, as an autonomous person, are engaging in the discussion and the direct action of the way that the work is being completed. For decisions being made directly, it's a component of direct democracy as a direct action as opposed to representative decisions that are made uh, at a high level. Would that be an accurate statement?
I would say I would say self-representation basically is the big difference. In in a majority rule democracy, I think it would be more common to have your word overridden, and we experience this now in like big state representative democracies where we just don't feel like voting makes a difference. If you're in a red state that consistently votes red, but you vote blue, you're always going to be overridden. And in in a direct union democracy, like what we've been talking about, that doesn't usually happen. The difference really comes down to the fact that you're speaking for yourself directly. You're not saying, here's this one big decision, now vote yes or no. It's There's nuance to the discussion.
Well, I'd say even more than that, emphasizing the collectivity, like even more than an individual. Like if you're just an individual worker who wants to um, act against your employer, it's going to be much harder than if you combined your power with the other people that are part of your organization, right? The difference between majority rule, and this is a strength of consensus largely, is that the people who are affected are still not entirely deciding, and a consensus structure, or one in which the workers actually all decide and get their uh, actions coordinated with each other, they are stronger and they are less likely to fail or see or deal with unforeseen things that weren't necessarily talked about with everybody, uh, or when other people's perspectives aren't taken into account. Like the minority perspective could actually have a very important nuanced outlook that could change the trajectory of an action that is being taken.
I've got kind of a follow-up question to this almost. That's something that that I think about a lot when I think about anarcho-syndicalism, which is that it's a concern that how would people who are not able to work fit into the decision-making process? Like people who are disabled in some kind of way. And some of these examples are in a capitalist framework. Like, obviously, if we were in a society that these theories propose, there wouldn't be homeless people. But people who are unable to work for various reasons, would they be left out of the decision making process entirely when it comes to larger scale things than just the workplace? Or how do you guys think that would work? That's always something I've been confused about.
Well, I would say specifically, going back to Spain, this is one thing that actually is a slight pitfall of anarchist syndicalism, but all anarchist syndicalists kind of made up for it without talking much about it. They did have outside organizations, like they had specific anarchist theaters, anarchist clubs, like anything you could think of, they made an anarchist version of it. So it wasn't only your workplace, and this would bring in people who weren't even unionized, people that maybe weren't even workers or were unemployed, so that they
Right.
still could have access to the decisions that affect them.
Yeah.
Even though that's not necessarily part of the framework that's presented by a lot of them, that's the actual actions that they took a lot of times.
Right. On paper, without knowing that, that's very useful. I've always been concerned that it still creates an us and them dynamic between people who are working and people who are not working. Whether it's seen as disrespectful because you're not working, or that you've, aged out, or that you're pregnant or something like that, and so your opinion isn't quite as important. And obviously that's not what they're saying directly at all. Those are assumptions on my part or concerns, but it's good to hear that in practice, that's not really what happened, at least in the microcosm of the Spanish Civil War. That's the importance of councils outside of workplaces, says Logan. Yep, absolutely, 100%.
Do you think anarchist unions are still an effective way to fight capitalism?
Big time. Speaking as someone who works as an independent contractor for a job that disenfranchises us not as much as possible, but they certainly try to, specifically Instacart. The existence of a larger, like macro union that encompasses lots of fields allows people to fit in with people from other places and find connections that aren't simply like trade to trade. That absolutely opens up to a lot of these broader ideas that are super useful.
I would argue that anarchist unions, specifically in terms of the union framework, are the only effective way to fight capitalism. That specifically, like looking at the United States context, we could see every single one of our unions are largely captured, even by the right wing, but even captured by their employers because of their more reformist stance. Like unions, they're more of a neutral body. Like they can be used to just negotiate between the bosses and the workers. But anarchist unions specifically, they focus on direct action and increased action in order to get these concessions and eventually seize the means of production. Right? This is something that I think can only effectively be done through an anarchist praxis, especially in an area where all of your unions are captured by reformists, that is.
Uh, this might be controversial, but I don't think unions by themselves have the kind of power that they did, 100 years ago.
I
I
don't think
mean,
that's at all controversial.
well, take
A lot
general
of our
strikes.
we're largely a service economy now. Like a lot of our industry was sent to the global south, especially with Nixon and a lot of his policies expanding our influence using our fiat currency. We had to actually invest in other places, factories, and shut down a lot of hours. This took away a lot of the power of like the industrial workers, for example. Like a lot of general strikes worked when it was the miners, the railway workers, the people delivering mail, the people in steel manufacturing, but we don't necessarily have even that infrastructure set up in the same way as we did even 100 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. I think unions are a good concept, and I don't see any reason not to build them. But I also don't think they can't be at the front anymore. It's like they once said the era of the barricade is over. In the same sense, the era of the union is kind of ended now too, and we've moved on to like neighborhood councils, like you were saying earlier, Logan. Uh, yeah, I don't think they're what they were, and I don't think they're still the most effective way to go.
Yeah, I think with any large mass movement, radical unions will definitely have a place, but
Hmm.
they're likely not going to be at the forefront, at least in the United States. Like in areas that do have the infrastructure, as I was talking about, that's still a pretty good way to go about things. And it's kind of our job to support those movements,
Hmm.
even with rhetoric, but especially materially to help them overthrow. A lot of the time, are U.S. investors in other countries, right? But yeah, I think that places in the global north largely have to take a different approach that is not only union oriented.
I'm gonna verbalize what I said in the chat because I think that a good way to start that process though, instead of starting blank slate and saying, okay, we need something completely different, I think that in the global north, we can still start with the loose concept of a union, but then say, all right, almost from a more creative perspective, how does this, let's break this down to the most basic concept that it represents. Take off all of the stuff that is more specific to like industrialized labor. And let's look at what happens when we plug that concept into these new types of jobs, like app jobs and service industry jobs and things that didn't really exist to the scale that they do now when these concepts were really being developed. I think that the idea of a union is still the most effective starting point for a new type of concept for how to organize. I don't think it should be rejected completely, as something to build on for other types of work and organizing. I feel like it's a very good seed for something completely different.
Yeah, I think largely for like those app jobs was that you work for Instacart, but
Mhm.
starting like drivers guilds or something is a more
Yeah.
effective way to do it because it's not necessarily going to be a union.
No.
It's more similar to the like in Britain, there was a pretty big guild movement where they were building a bunch of houses, and any of their surplus that they got, they would just invest right back into their organization and right back into building more of their capacity to actually deliver these services. So you can, even in people that don't have the same employer, you can still have the idea of a uh, like a whole industry working together and kind of creating standards so that they can still move forward with their demands.
There's a really good real world example. I forget what city and what year, but within the last 20 years, there was an American city that managed to get very close to having a union for Uber or Lyft, one of those two. And basically, they got as close to having it to just needing to get it like recognized officially by the city. And what happened was that the corporation basically said, whichever rideshare corporation it was, it doesn't really matter to me. Basically said to the city government, they communicated directly and said, if you let this union exist, we will stop doing service in your city completely. We will pull out of your city, and it will be your fault. And every time that's happened, I think only a handful of times, after months and months, maybe years of work to even get that far for the people on the ground, this city rejected it and it died in the water. Which is absolutely a vulnerability of these kinds of concepts, that they need state recognition to really have that kind of power. Dom?
So Claudia asks, what do you think is the best form of protest to maximize efficiency and raise awareness?
Mm. I'll make this short because this is a soapbox that I can stand on for hours. But I think that today's protests, now I don't know about efficiency, but today's protests have lost the art of the sort of theatrical aspect of protests that were happening in the 60s and 70s. Some of them got a little unnecessarily theatrical. I'm not really talking about that, but I'm talking about thinking about the average person who's looking at this as an enemy, thinking about their experience of the protest. Things like malicious compliance, costumes, taking advantage of people that look strange or acting strange, optical illusions. I think that we need to be, people are used to protests. They know what a protest looks like. They know what a protest sign looks like. They know what to expect. And it happens so often that people just kind of turn their brains off if they don't like it. It's becoming less and less effective unless it's so large that it can't be ignored. But that's my 2 cents.
Well, I think effective protests they have to be targeted, like specifically if you're for like No Kings is a good example. Like the rather than just standing on the side of the road, like doing something where you actually have a target, right? If you're protesting against ICE, you go to a local ICE facility, you call in people, you get your own media streams, going out into the like spreading your message to the masses of people, spreading awareness and showing people that you know where the vulnerabilities are. And if you get more people, they will not be able to contain it. Like that's the effective protest in order to get concessions. And of course, this kind of goes back into the idea of direct action in the workplace is very similar with protests. It helps you develop your revolutionary capacity even as a single person, but collectively, if people see these concessions that they got through more like even civil disobedience, things like sit-ins, that develops their capabilities to do more radical actions in the future. But largely, people just go away from protests feeling like they didn't do anything, largely because they stood on the side of the road, or as you said, Jordan, they all look the same nowadays. Like there needs to be more targeting, it needs to be more deliberate, and it needs to be more effective so that more people join in. Like after every protest, you want to have more than you did the last time because people saw its effectiveness.
There's also a really good thing that I learned from an episode of Cool People Who Did Cool Stuff about the ACT UP movements to combat AIDS in the the 80s and 90s. It wasn't just them. There were lots of people doing this, but basically like to not just do protests, but to also have like meetings elsewhere where people can talk about almost like group therapy related to the movement. That's less about protests and more about processing, debriefing, things to make people feel included so that it's not just about bodies and spaces, but it's also about taking the information of being at these protests and these movements and also adding the human element back into them.
Real quick, I just wanted to shout out Brandon's comment. He says, yes to the question on the screen, but I do feel a revolution should be rooted in a wide culture of resistance to human and eco exploitation, instead of a reaction and appeal to corporate capitalism and worker exploitation. Seems very self limiting to make that the primary focus. I was gonna sing this, but I frankly don't have the voice for it today. So, the Sabotabi was invented by Ralph Chaplin in 1913 for the IWW. The story goes that during a particularly rough IWW strike, a scrawny black cat wandered into the strikers' camp. The workers fed the camp back to health, and as the kitty recovered, the strike's fortunes dramatically improved, leading the workers to adopt the feline as their mascot. It's since become an enduring icon of anarcho-syndicalism all over the world, and it's depicted as a black cat, as raggedy as the workers it was meant to represent, and symbolic of the power of the working class and their struggles against capitalism.
I think all of us have seen that, but I didn't know it was like they just saw a cat and the cat was like their good luck charm or something. That's pretty cool.
That makes the most sense, though, given that people have never really changed. People would do that today. Lambda, were you going to say something earlier before we moved on?
Oh, there was there were just a couple of high level things that I think that there are competing priorities that are at play. I think one is the repercussion of actionable strikes that uh, exist from a legal framework perspective. That
Mm.
if you can put anything that can realistically put a grinding gear stoppage into the way that the state functions currently, it is a triple decade, 30-year prison sentence felony, where the action of doing, say, a a strike at a meat packing facility or at an industrial farm, as opposed to, say, a work stoppage at a anything that's related to critical state infrastructure, has deep direct punishment, as what a lot of protesters at Standing Rock found whenever any type of disruption to oil pipeline work, or to uh, anything related to oil extraction, is immediately a extreme felony because it's interrupting state-run assets. And the extreme punishment and the extreme action that is taken, it leads to the political options that are on the table for taking direct action as being uh, significantly uh, reduced as compared to whenever there were industrial uh, worker strikes that led to sabotage and mining facilities, and sabotage that led to uh, disruption of work in others. Now, if it's rated as a a state asset or critical to state infrastructure. It is a disappearance into the prison-industrial complex.
I think this brings me to an important point I want to make. The the era of the union brought us to an era where pretty much everything you can do to affect the workers' will upon the state has been outlawed. You can have a strike, but there are so many rules to a strike. You can't do a picket line. You can't make it so people can't make it into work. There's so many things that we did to be effective in the time of the union that you simply can't do without repercussions now. And I just wanted to point out that the state has consistently basically used what we do. Every time we do something, they make it illegal. I just
I'd say
wanted to.
that goes back to the idea of dual power that was being talked about. Like in kind of what Jordan said there about knowing the risks involved and the potential repercussions. Like you have to actually build enough of the power outside so you can protect yourself um, against any repression. You shouldn't do any actions that will lead to more repression on you and that may even look negative to the people like on the outset that weren't part of it. They may be scared actually to do actions in the future if one, you don't get anything out of it, and two, you get heavily repressed.
I want to add on that real quick and say that, like, and the attitude, if let's say that a bunch of people that are, I'm as vague as fucking possible because this is a public forum, but people, let's say that people who are planning some kind of direct action, and from the vaguest possible things that they've mentioned, because they have good security culture, that it's outside of your personal comfortable level of risk. So you're like, okay, I'm not involved. I think that the right move there is not to say, so I'm not going to be a part of any of this. It's more to say, okay, then what can I do? It's not a question of not being involved if you can't accept the risk of something more dramatic like a direct action, but accepting that perhaps just cooking a bunch of food and driving people around and watching people's kids and cats and doing research and stuff is just as important. I think that if everybody had that attitude, the few people who are willing to take those direct risks and do the actual direct things like fighting in the streets and more things with direct immediate consequences would have the support necessary to be able to face whatever challenges await them with more support.
So I know I've kind of come in here at the end and I haven't been around very much, but I think I've got the vibe of this part of the question and answer here. And I was just going to mention that, when the union movement got its start and was very radical, in fact, it was a time when there were laws against people even assembling in large numbers. Like they literally, a union itself was illegal, let alone a strike, right? And so I'm not like disagreeing with anything any of y'all have said, but historic perspective of like the oldest unions was, yeah, what we're doing is probably illegal, and yeah, there's going to be repercussions. That's why we've got to win. Like it really drove them to make sure that they won. This wasn't going to be symbolic. They were all going to lose their jobs if they didn't get what they wanted. But yeah, sorry.
Claudia asked, do you think our democratic republic government in the U.S. will be sustainable long term as of now? I'm going to go ahead. That's going to be a negative.
Yeah.
So,
no.
the contradictions of capitalism are quickly building up, and it's often said that fascism is capitalism in decay. If we take that at face value and we accept that the US has gone completely off the rails fascist, then capitalism here is dying and we're going to see a really big collapse coming soon.
A power vacuum in a country full of power is not going to lead to anything good.
Logan says, yeah, to march down the street, you have to get permission from the state, or the big diesel trucks have free reigns to drive right through you.
Oh, this is in reference to what Brendan said above. Isn't it still extremely difficult to legally meet in large numbers publicly in America? Well, and even when you do get permission, the cops might just, hurt you anyway. Like what happened in Tulsa during the 2020 protests, that they let someone onto the highway and they drove through the protesters, injuring a few people quite severely.
Oh, that brings me back to my point about them making everything you can do illegal. Oklahoma legalized running over protesters.
Wait, what? I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, that was in the middle of the during the George Floyd uprising. They made that legal.
Good Lord.
And that's why everybody's really careful about standing in the streets here.
Yeah. Ironic, given that people like saying that, oh, someone was trying to do violence with a car is like a classic right-wing argument when they're doing violence on someone in a car. Logan says, they also make you disperse at certain times with the threat of arrest and can make it so the organizers of the protest are criminally liable for any damages done. Which also is a good revolving back to something that someone, it may have been you, Logan, kind of hinted at one of these ideas that's kind of fluid throughout a lot of different forms of anarchism, that like, if there is no head, then they can't cut the head off, which is to say if there is no organizer, which is why that's in quotes, I assume, is that sometimes the person arrested is not actually the organizer, because sometimes protests don't have one, but they can't accept that, so they need to find somebody who seems popular and just take them and make them responsible.
Yeah, that I would say that's why you should know. Like, if you're doing a protest that you think could end up with criminal activity, you should never put your name on it. You should never say who the organizers are, because they will just straight up arrest you for it, and you will get charged for everything.
Guys, just good general advice is that you should never, ever, ever give out all your personal information at a protest. If you have to RSVP for a protest, that's not the protest you want to be at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was insane watching them do that and then watching people accept that from the 50501 movement.
I wonder if is it insidiousness or is it naivety, do you think?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, probably.
I don't think
That's my exact answer. Yeah, bit of both.
So, who's doing what? Plug the pluggables.
I'm clarifying a link real quick so I can post it in the chat. Someone else should start.
Well, I have my publication, Roses and Resistance. I just published a new rant about libertarianism. That was fun. Go check that out. And I've got a book coming out soon. Keep your eyes peeled for that.
My link tree isn't working, so I'll just post the link to my website. Me and my partner, who is usually not on these calls, have an art duo called Astrophoria. We do graphic design, sculpture, large-scale performances, music, writing, all kinds of stuff. We did a big zine that ballooned from 40 pages to like 240 pages, interviewing and collaborating with 5 or 6 different queer artists around Oklahoma. So I'll put our website in and you can browse around and look around at different stuff if you are so inclined.
Anybody else?
Ooh, I've got one. That's just a general good advice. Learn about the salute method of posting information if you are trying to participate in keeping track of certain activities going around in your city. It is a helpful method for avoiding fear-mongering tactics by providing more specific information for people to use. I will keep it general.
Yes, please, people, for the love of God, use salute when you're making reports. Please. I am one of the people that has to sift reports, and it can be very, very irritating when all you say is, "Hey, we think there's ice there." My little rant's over on that. Lambda posted the salute reporting method. S is for size and strength. A is for actions and activity. L is for location and direction. U is for uniform and clothes. T is for time and date of observation. And E is for equipment and weapons. All very important stuff when you're making reports. So, next week,
Wait,
going
I want
to-
to read. Wait. I want to read what Brendan said. Brendan writes,
Oh.
please consider donating to Kurdish Red Crescent, aka Heva Sor, for Rojavans facing extreme repression. Let me know at email written in the chat. I don't know if you want me to just read that out loud, but I will if you are okay with it. Let me know if you donate, and I'll send a match donation. Oh, so yeah, I'll read that out. It's Heva Donate, Heyva, donate at proton.me. Email that if you donate, and they will send a match donation. That's super cool. Thanks, Brendan.
Yeah, I'm really glad you stopped me for that. Yes, thank you. So, for those who don't know, Kurdistan is under attack right now. Rojava. It is one of the most important projects to the anarchists, and in general, it's an amazing project. Women have been given equal power in Rojava. There's an entire women's revolution, and the Kurdish female fighters are some of the most badass fighters in the world. Turkey has been trying to ethnically cleanse or commit a genocide in Rojava for decades now. They really don't like the existence of the Kurdish. So long live Rojava, live the YPG and the YPJ. And yeah. So next week, we'll be talking more about the Spanish Revolution in Barcelona and why it's one of the most important events in anarchist history.
You mean the week after next?
Yeah, that.
Next week is organizer education led by Daniel.
Yeah. So I wanted to do one specifically about the Spanish Civil War because, come on, it is one of the coolest events in our history. It takes place pretty much all in Barcelona and Aragon, and we hope you'll come join us. It won't be so theory heavy because we have already discussed all the theory behind it here. So yeah.
Yeah, we're kind of playing around with format as we go through with this. And one that we decided to try after last time's flop was that we're going to do one lesson about theory to really get into the weeds. And then one lesson, once we've been informed by the theory, that's focusing more on the history so we can kind of connect the two outside of the smaller examples provided. So if you have any input on format or just ideas on what we could do to do better, be sure to let us know somehow, however you can. And we'll certainly take it into account.
So, we've run out of things to talk about tonight, everyone. Have a good night.
Yep. Bye, guys.